Today I have a big honor to welcome among us Professor Dominik Opatrný, who is our big friend. Th.D. will tell a little bit more about his professional career and the story of our relationship. But I am very grateful to Dominik that he always have a time for our students, for our professors. Because of Dominik we have so-called common diploma between Palacký University Philosophical Faculty and our faculty. So even we have, when we have extra places for Erasmus cooperation, always because of our friend Professor Opatrný always thinking about us. I am convinced that they may share these possibilities with other universities, but they always have us as a priority for cooperation. So this we are very grateful because we have too many possibilities for traveling, sharing our experience, and something to learn from your wonderful faculty and from your colleagues. So I would like to invite for a few words Th.D., who is vis-a-vis Dominik in our faculty, and a little bit tell about professional career and a couple of words about Dominik. So, very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm words.
Okay, we have a very hectic situation today because of the air alerts, and I hope for much better organization of the lecture in the conference hall, and unfortunately we have to be jammed here into this small room. But it's my pleasure to greet here Professor Dominik Opatrný and to give him the floor. He is a specialist in Christian ethics, in moral theology, in bioethics partially, and today he will be speaking about the topic of biblical imagery of creation, biblical imagery of human being as the crown of creation and someone responsible for supporting creation. I especially welcome this topic because this is something our faculty is prioritizing these days. As you know, Professor Th.D. and his team are developing what they call patristic eco-theology, something that becomes quite popular these days in the academia worldwide, because we are all conscious of and aware of ecological challenges that face the present day world. Global warming, how you look at it doesn't matter. There are different theories of explaining it, but it's an issue. Pollution and you know, the general waste problems, plastic, and in some cases we cannot do anything with this, but in other cases even small contribution when we sort our garbage and separate plastic or batteries from general waste is a small thing we can do to support God's creation. And we as theologians, I think, can contribute to this debate because small room because we can give the sense to the people why we should care about the created world, about physical world. Not only because we want to live in it comfortably, but because it's also a great spiritual responsibility on our part. So I won't take the stage from the professor. I give him the possibility to disclose his thoughts on this matter.
Thank you.
One more clarifying, Dominik earned his PhD in biblical studies.
Yes, in New Testament.
Yeah,
okay.
Very important.
Okay. So it's a connecting bridge between what he is doing as a professor and what he has learned as doctoral student. Yes.
Thank you very much, Taras, for this introduction. Okay, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for the invitation, because I am at the university for the 4th time and I am always coming very gladly here. And we are also very grateful for the students who are coming to Olomouc. Maybe we can talk a little bit after my lecture about it. But you have very bright students, very engaged students, and I think that the cooperation is mutually win-win. Now, concerning our topic, I have spent my breakfast today with Oleg Kindi, so he told me something about what's going on here, and well, I proposed several topics and this one was chosen. It was a lecture which was prepared for a summer school in Vienna, and then we continued to prepare it for proceedings for a common book. So I want to focus on three metaphors of the relationship between humans and nature. And during my past visit in Lviv, I have learned some new law, some new Murphy's law about UKU, and I will read it aloud. Whenever I give a lecture at UKU, there is always someone in the audience who has studied the topic more extensively than I have. So with this respect, I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm at home in moral theology and in New Testament, but I will go a little bit into Old Testament to get the connection. The content of my lecture is, I will start with metaphors in science and ethics, a little bit theory for the preparation, then I will discuss the 3 metaphors, steward, gardener and shepherd, and some concluding remarks. So first of all, metaphors in science and ethics. We could think that metaphors belong to literature. And if you imagine the language of literature, books, novels, poetry, and the language of science, I mean hard science, not theology, but hard science, those could be 2 completely different worlds. Yeah? And it would seem that metaphors belong only to literature. I do not know whether in your classes of Ukrainian language you discuss the literature and you discuss the metaphors there. We did it in our Czech classes. But is there any connection to the language of science? Well, there is a connection. For example, in this book, Metaphors for Environmental Sustainability, written by Brendan Larson, the author gives a list of about 100 metaphors which are used in environmental science. Sometimes it is obvious that it is a metaphor, sometimes it's not so obvious, but for example, restoration or some of the can you read it? Some of the words: flagship, hybrid, corridor. The animals are using corridor. Corridors are here in the building, not in the countryside. So we use metaphors even in hard sciences because we are humans and we cannot step outside our human body. And I think that in this respect the metaphors have 3 important functions. First of all, there is the cognitive function. We understand the world around us through metaphors. If something is too complex, too difficult for us to grasp, then we use metaphors to connect it to something which is closer to us, to allow us to conceptualize something of one sort as if it were another. So we use what we know to understand what we do not know, to imagine it somehow. Then the other function is didactic. When we try to give over what we have learned, when we try to share our knowledge, we need to use metaphor to explain. It's possible to use very abstract terms, but sometimes we can use a good metaphor and the partner in the dialogue can understand. When I was at school, they used to display the atoms with the image of solar system, like the electrons flying around the center of the atom, which is only a metaphor. It doesn't work in such a way, but we can imagine that. And then the third function is performative. By using metaphors, proper metaphors, we can lead our steps, we can lead the society, we can a little bit shapen our values and our worldview, and therefore also change the world. Now it seems to me that it is very close to... Do you know this man? Who he is? It's Alistair MacIntyre, a very famous philosopher. I think he's still living, but he is very old. He was born in I
called him a couple of times.
Yeah.
I didn't see him.
Yeah.
His picture.
Alistair MacIntyre. And in 1971, he wrote a book, After Virtues. And it was one of the books which produced a huge interest into virtue ethics. And in this book, he describes how the virtues function. Virtues are not abstract concepts, at least not in Aristotelian ethics. Virtues are connected to the virtuous people. Yeah? So we should imagine the ideal. We should imagine a person who is brave, who is just, who is reasonable, and so on. And then we can compare ourselves and we can learn where we are. So we have the ideal, where we want to get. We have our current position, and then we have to get to the ideal. And the way how Aristotle imagined it was practicing. We have to practice as the soldiers, according to Aristotle, and as the sports persons practice. And this is very similar with the metaphors. They can show us how we could behave, for example, in our environment, natural environment. We can compare ourselves, and we can think what we can do to improve our behavior. I will show it at first at other examples, not this human nature relationship. The first one is the relationship between doctor and a patient. In the history of humankind, the physicians were always the specialists who knew, and the patients, they were often passive, they were treated like children, and therefore we call this attitude or this relationship to be paternalistic. Yeah? That the physician, the doctor, behaves like a parent to his child. Then in the new times, some few decades ago, a new relationship appeared, and it's the relationship of partners. It's taken from business, and the physician and the patients, they are now partners, and they are negotiating what should be the best treatment. Now, this image is not ideal, because the physician has or possesses always better knowledge. He knows, he is the specialist. and the patient is usually in a difficult situation. They are stressed, they are feared, they cannot understand what's going on around them, especially when they are severely sick. So it does not describe completely the relationship, but there is this this ideal that we want to move to a more balanced relationship between the physician, the doctor, and the patient. And then we can imagine other metaphors for the relationship. The doctor could be seen as an executioner. If you imagine Dr. Mengele, he was a typical executioner. And I think that today many doctors refuse euthanasia precisely because they would feel to be the executioners, or their fellow doctors would be the executioners. So they say this shouldn't be connected to the practice of the doctor or of the physician. So this was about the doctors, and I think this is quite well known. What was interesting for me when I digged deeper into the topic, that something similar can be seen among the nurses, but it is a little bit more complicated. So the nurse in the 19th century was seen sometimes as a soldier, in that sense that she should obey the doctor as the soldier obeys the officer. She should be loyal, completely loyal to the doctors and to the hospital. Then came new metaphors, the metaphor of advocacy and the academic metaphor. The first one means that the nurse was seen as an advocate, protecting the interests of the patient, that she is here for the patient, she is closest to the patient. The doctors, they are deciding, they do a lot of paperwork, but the sister is at the bed of the patient and she is protecting his or her interests. This is a useful metaphor, but it can be also misused if you see the sister or the nurse in the opposition to the doctors and to the other members of the personnel, of the staff, then it could be dangerous. Another metaphor is the academic one. It means that the sisters were trained were trained in academic. That the nurses were trained in. It's over. The alarm is over. Okay, I've heard it now in my cell phone in English. Great. So I have to concentrate, come back again. The academic metaphor means that the nurses were trained in academic ethics. They were discussing ethical dilemmas, and in this way was seen the moral life of a nurse. And then there are two more very modern metaphors. The individualism, metaphor of individualism, focusing or saying that the sister should help the patient to defend his or her dignity, and dignity means usually autonomy in this way. So the moral life of the sister is supporting the autonomy of the patient, and community is caring. We do not have probably this so much in Europe, but maybe in Africa, the role of the sister in the community. She's supporting the community. So That's from the research of Mary Ellen Wurzbach and her article, The Moral Metaphors in Nursing. Now, there is one more important thing we need to keep in mind with respect to the Bible. Metaphors are culturally conditioned, so they could be understood differently in different cultures. Or let me say it a better way, the same image could be understood differently in different cultures. And there is this metaphor of body politic. This term is used in English. It's like the nation is understood as a body. We can find it in old Latin literature. In Livy, he discusses this fable he discusses that the plebeians, the lower class of the Roman citizens, they started to revolt and didn't want to work for the nobleman. And a certain nobleman came to them and explained it on a body. Imagine that the hands become angry that they have to work, that they have to bring food to the mouth, and say, oh, the stomach doesn't work, so we won't feed the stomach. But then the whole body becomes weak, and also the hands. So each part of the society has its duties, and we need to fulfill them in order to flourish as a whole society. So that's our Western understanding of this metaphor. But by Western, I mean the culture which is also Greek culture, the Eastern Church as well. Yeah? But when we take the understanding in China, and there was a research on it by Andreas Muzov, the Chinese can use the metaphor of body for a nation also, but in a different way. When you say to the Chinese, describe China as a body, they will say, yeah, different cities are different organs, and they can connect different cities to different organs according to some connection or some imagination. And they say that the trains, the railways, they are like the backbone of the country. So it's completely different understanding, and still the image of body applied to the nation. So on this I wanted to show that the same image can be understood in different ways. And my question is, do we now understand or comprehend biblical metaphors only through their biblical contexts? Or do we understand them according to our modern culture, Euro-American culture, for example? And now we proceed to the first metaphor, and that's the metaphor of steward. We can find discussions about stewardship, about the metaphor of steward for people in the 19th century in the United States. And this is not in the environmental context, it's much broader. This book was written in 1861, or at least this publication is from 1861. I think it was written a little bit earlier. But this movement, stewardship movement, focused on the whole earth. We are the stewards of the whole earth. Then on time, we are the stewards of our time, and we should use it wisely. We should use our talents as good stewards. But it was focused also on tithing, like that you should give 1/10 of your income to the church for some beneficial activities. But it is connected, the metaphor of steward, to also to this biblical quotation. You can read it, I won't read it as a whole. So this is a little bit archaic translation of Genesis, but you can see that God speaks about the dominion of humans over the sea and over the animals and over the whole creation. And the question is, how should we understand this dominion? And in 1960s, there was very influential article by Lynn White. It was written in 1967 and it was published in the journal Science. And Lynn White says, man named all the animals, thus establishing his dominance over them. God planned all of this explicitly for man's benefit and rule. So the whole creation is here, according to Genesis, according to Lynn White, only because of humans. There is no other reason for the creation. No item in the physical creation had any purpose save to serve man's purpose. So Lynn White says Christianity and Judaism, they are very anthropocentric and they are therefore responsible for our environmental crisis. That was his position. And since then, many people tried to say that he was wrong. And they could use the concept of stewardship as a very useful to interpret this dominance, this dominion in terms of stewardship. One of them was John Paul II. I found that already in 1948 he wrote about stewardship. Development strategies should be based on a just worldwide socio-economic order directed towards an equitable sharing of created goods, respectful stewardship of the environment and natural resources. So we should be just. That's the first one, is the distributive justice, and then respectful stewardship towards the nature, towards the creation. Then Pope Benedict XVI spoke about stewardship as well, and of course very important is the encyclical Laudato Si by Pope Francis, where he explicitly says our dominion over the universe should be understood more properly in the sense of responsible stewardship. And then sometime later he adds that the stewardship should be Eucharistically motivated. So the popes, at least since John Paul II, speak about the approach of humans towards the creation in terms of stewardship. But very briefly, usually, we can find more explanation on the stewardship in the document issued by the International Theological Commission, Communion and Stewardship. There's a typo. Yeah? And this document says human beings exercise this stewardship by gaining scientific understanding of the universe. So the knowledge that you are studying, that's part of our stewardship. That's part of our responsible co-work or responsible work with the creation. Then by caring responsibly for the natural world, at first we need to study and then we can care, and by guarding their own biological integrity. So 3 levels of this stewardship. Now, I have said that the concept of stewardship started or appeared in Protestantism, and then it was taken over into Catholic Church because it was useful to answer this objection that Christianity is responsible for the environmental problems. But also in Protestantism appeared criticism of the concept of stewardship. One of the deepest critiques is Claire Palmer. She's in the picture and she gives several objections. First of all, humans are never called stewards of nature in the Bible. You cannot find a place and say, here it is written. Then if you see nature, or if you see humans as stewards, then there is this image that God is absentee, that he is an absentee landlord, because the stewards were usually responsible for the farms and for the estates, and in the English-speaking world, for example, the owners of the estates live in London. Then humans are detached from the natural world. Yeah? The stewards on one side and the natural world on another side. Then in the idea of stewardship, there is this hierarchy. Like the steward is above the other servants. And the last thing is that to be a steward you need some kind of expertise, and the question is, do we have this expertise to manage the world, to manage the nature? So that's basically her critique. Concerning the first objection, she says that humans are never called stewards of nature in the Bible. Well, they are not called stewards, but the English word steward is a translation of Hebrew asher al-beit. So the one who is above the house. In Hebrew Bible you don't have direct equivalent of our word family in the modern sense, but the basic structure is the house. Father, mother, children, some servants. Yeah? And in Greek, it's, I think in the new translation it's oikonomos. We say oikonomos. Yeah? So the one who takes care of the house, and we have the term economy from it now. But if you read Psalm 8, you find there that humans are given dominion over the works of God's hands. You have put all things under their feet. So humans are above the world, and the only difference is that the world isn't called a house. There might be some reasons why the word is not called house, but we can skip it now. So the term steward can have different, or can produce different associations. It could be the colonial associations. That means that the steward is the first servant who somehow manages the estates, the houses, and the owner of those estates is away, is in London. So there is some sort of colonialism in it, and therefore for many people it could be difficult to take. But in other languages, apart from in Italian, Spanish, French, it's usually something like that humans are the administrators of the nature. And minister means to serve. Then, or in English, the term used in English, in German, who does speak German, Verwalter. So that's again someone who takes care of money, property, buildings, debts, or even inheritance, and is responsible to others. So the steward is not the owner, that's the opposite of the owner, and the steward is responsible and could be responsible towards God, could be responsible towards future generation or generations. And then there's this question whether we could be responsible to the nature itself. I think that we can, because we can be responsible also to people who are not conscious, to kids or very old people. We can act responsibly even though we do not get the response from them. This was the first metaphor. We proceed to the second one, and that's of the gardener. I think that there is not enough air in the room, but we can leave open the door. So I hope we will not fall asleep, and if after the night it will be okay, I believe. So the second metaphor is gardener. It was proposed by Mark Nahm. He used it in his lecture and in his dissertation. He's an English theologian of Chinese roots. And we can connect the metaphor of gardener very well to the Bible, because you cannot read it probably now, but we can read in Genesis, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it, to take care of it. In Hebrew there is this word avad, which means to serve it. So Adam could be understood as some sort of gardener. But there are some interesting questions. If Adam was expelled from the Garden of Eden, does it mean that we are still gardener or not? Or we are not gardeners anymore, but we are farmers now? So I believe this is not a metaphor that's describing the situation which was among the Jews or among the Israelites 2000 years ago, because this text should be, I believe, read as etiology, which means explaining why we have to work so heavily. And the explanation is because we were expelled from the Garden of Eden. Now, Mark Nahm, the British theologian, he connects the metaphor to the New Testament, to the Gospel of John. After the resurrection, Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." At least in this English translation, it is the only place where gardener is in the Bible. I have checked. So this could be somehow connected to the metaphor. And Mark Nahm says that it's a Johannine irony. You probably remember that in John's Gospel, sometimes the persons speak and they say crazy things, but on another level, those things are true. I don't have it here, but you remember that they say it's better that one person dies for the whole nation. It's crazy, but Jesus was dying for the whole humankind. So it could be Johannine irony. And he says that Jesus is the kingly gardener who is taking charge of his garden, which reminds us of Isaiah. So he gives it a Christological meaning. Jesus started the new harmony, or with Jesus started the new harmony which was here in the Garden of Eden. It's coming back. Now we can ask again, is this possible to use the image of a gardener in the secular context, outside of the church? So gardener is cultivating, steward is managing. So gardener is just taking care of the plants and they grow themselves. Yeah? It's more open and free approach. Then gardeners are taking care of the garden, and the opposite could be the miner, who is just excavating, just grabbing. Yeah? And then another pair could be protection of life. Gardener is protecting the life, and hunters, on the other hand, are killing life. And then there is this aesthetic significance, because the gardener sees the garden usually as beautiful, and we should see the world around us also as beautiful. Nevertheless, there could be also problems. According to Bookless, who wrote about this image of gardener as well, gardening does involve subduing the earth, fighting back weeds, managing and developing creation. So the gardener is the one who decides what plants should grow in the place and what should not. What is weed and what is useful. Those are our categories. They are not in the nature. We consider some plants to be useful and some of them to be weeds. But that's only our view. And now I proceed to the last metaphor, and that's the metaphor of shepherd. So shepherd who is taking care of the sheep. This metaphor was used by a Czech Protestant Old Testament scholar Jan Heller, who in his last years taught at the Catholic Faculty of Theology in Prague, so he was very much ecumenical open, and he wrote a lecture, then it became a chapter in his book, Man, a Shepherd of Creation. And we can ask, is this metaphor justifiable? Because it seems to be a little bit like it looks very well, but is it something behind it? Well, Adam, according to Genesis himself, was vegetarian. It was only later that people started to eat meat, and the first hunter in the Bible is Nimrod, but he is presented very shortly in the Bible, and in the later tradition he is a controversial figure. So the opposite of this shepherd could be a hunter. Hunter is just killing, just hunting the animals and killing. The shepherd takes care of them. Maybe could be killing them, maybe not, but definitely takes care of the animals. And it could be also an opposite of a farmer. The shepherd could be an opposite of a farmer. And now I will quote Jan Heller, who says that, and I will give you time to read it. Can you read it? Also from the... Yeah. So the farmer is the image of humans after the fall, and the shepherd, who is much more free, is the image of humans before the fall. And yeah, it's interesting that in the Hebrew Bible, the verb used is the same. No, it was the gardener. The gardener was serving the ground, and the farmer is serving it as well.
You said, but it should be vice versa. Farmer before the fall and hunter after the fall.
No, I meant farmer after the fall and the shepherd before the fall, according to Jan Heller. Because farmer, in contrast to the shepherd, is not the one who lives on someone else's blood.
Yeah, but they used to eat blood after the fall.
I see.
It should be vice versa.
But one who lives in the sweat of his face, so... Okay, I'll think about it. Thank you. I expected that I will have something to think about after this lecture. So the metaphor of shepherd in the Old Testament, it appears several times, many times. It could mean God, it could be national leaders, it could mean monarchs. But what is important, that the shepherds could be good or bad. So if we have it as our ideal, as our model, we are thinking only about good shepherds. Yeah? We want to be like the good shepherd. But we can talk or we can speak about bad shepherds as well. And then there is this question, and that's connected more to the secular understanding of the metaphor. Does being a shepherd necessarily include killing animals? I don't think so. It could be connected, but we have also in the Bible places where the shepherd is just working for another person. Then the Christological interpretation. This is Jan Zámečník, another Czech, quite young theologian. He says that the Christological meaning of shepherd is that he is the one who is altruistic and who self-sacrifices. Now my question is, should we self-sacrifice like towards the nature? Should we have these attitudes towards the nature? And the secular context, well, there could be some inspiration in that way that the shepherd usually leads a simple way of life. Could we live? Could we have him as a model for a simpler way of life? Then there are some conclusions. The metaphors, I believe, are useful also for ethics. They bring up various emotional responses. We should be aware of it. And if we stay in dialogue, we can see the images from the point of view of other persons, which could be enriching and sometimes we could have our models and be in a totally different position or place, but after some time we could feel this dissonance, this disproportion between our models and the way we live, and there is hope for change. And I like to approach things with a creative way, so I tried to play a little bit with those metaphors. For example, could you imagine a steward who would rearrange his master's house purely to his own liking, like, I don't like how God created the world, I want to change it completely. Or could you imagine a gardener who would cut down all the trees, the fruit trees, just to sell the timber, to sell the wood? Or could you imagine a shepherd who slaughters and eats all his entire flock? Those images could be used in the other way around. So that was what I wanted to share with you, and I have 2 more slides. First of them is the invitation to Olomouc, experience Olomouc with Erasmus. I know that not everybody in this room can travel now, but if you have the possibilities, we are trying to write Erasmus proposals and give the possibility to students to come to Olomouc. The language is very close, the distance is not so far away, and we provide also some courses in English. And to give you some view, this is the Faculty of Theology. It used to be a college for a Jesuit college for poor students. It's difficult to make a photo of it, and this is the seminaries. So if the seminarians were able to come, it's a huge building, but a small community of 20 seminarians and their priests. And my last image I am celebrating today. Does anyone know why I'm celebrating today?
Yes.
You know, Yuri, you have been to Olomouc and you know this. Because today a new president is inaugurated. We finally get rid of the old one and we have the new one, and I hope that we'll stay strong with him. So thank you very much for your attention.
So, questions? Seminarians? Ask questions.
Most of our students are very humble.
Sorry?
Most of our students are very humble.
Yeah.
So you have to encourage them.
There are several strategies. You can have 30 seconds to discuss it in pairs. What would you like to ask? And then raise your hand.
May I start?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. How do you find the metaphor of gardener natural? Because garden is as well a product of human.
Yeah.
Because we will not find garden in the nature. We find forest, oasis, but garden. So
That was what I was saying, that the gardener decides what should grow in which place and what shouldn't be in the garden at all. Yeah, so it's artificial. It's artificial, definitely. But
God was first gardener.
yeah. And the question
He
is,
planted garden.
should we be in the place of the gardener or only God?
Since we represent his representatives here, we should imitate him.
Okay, and then comes the next question. I very like to raise questions. Do we have the expertise to do it? So I personally believe in certain areas we can manage it, but we cannot manage the whole world. It's simply above our possibilities. But sometimes on the other hand, we need to do something when we see that the global climate is like corrupted. We need to try our best at least. Yeah?
How do you think before the fall were existed pests or not?
Oh. Well, what is pest? That's in our mind.
The entities removed by gardener.
Yeah. But you know, if you go to alone or to a forest, you can consider something to be a pest or to be a weed. But you can find out that it's useful in some ways, so you can pick it and use it as well. And I personally do not know much about the world before the fall and after the fall, but I have heard one lecture by another very good Protestant professor who also died already, Petr Pokorný, and he was asked at that time whether there was death and suffering, and his answer was, in the biological sense, there was death, but not in the deeper sense. And he gave an example from the nature, like the real suffering is produced usually by humans. It's inflicted by humans. But if a cat catches a bird, the bird usually, like how is it called in English, cannot move and gives up, and it seems that he's paralyzed, yes. And those people who were attacked by tigers and survived, they usually said that at that moment they were not feeling pain. But I'm reproducing the answer.
Thank you.
What is the most close for you of these three types?
Yeah. I didn't mention it here, but I think that we don't have to have only one metaphor. Sometimes we are in search of the proper metaphor, yeah? But we can use more of them, and some of them fit in this way and some of them fit in that way. So that was also the point of my paper, that we should use more of them and think how they can be used and where are their limits.
Maybe not so much a question, but continuation of what you just said is that often from my study of metaphors, quite limited, but I dealt with it in terms of patristic exegesis. Every metaphor is describing one facet of reality. No metaphor, at least in good exegesis, no metaphor is designed to be exhaustive, to be like for everything. Usually metaphor is like the rocket that brings the satellite to the orbit. So it serves for a certain time. It's useful only till a certain moment. If you dogmatize a metaphor and you want to take out of this metaphor all its meanings, it probably will rather distort the truth than serve the truth.
Yeah. And that could be called allegory, probably, if you try to connect all the details.
Maybe.
Can you tell us a little bit about, maybe it's not connected with your lecture, but I guess everybody would like to know what is a situation in Czech Republic in relation to war in Ukraine, what is the mood in the society, in the clerical circles, among ordinary people.
Very gladly. So I was thinking about it, how to talk here about the situation in the Czech Republic, and I think that I should start with saying that we all live in our social bubbles. So I also live in my own social bubble, but the social bubble is quite huge. Yeah? All the mainstream media are in support of Ukraine, and I believe, as far as I was in connection with some of you, they cover what's going on here very well. Probably we do not see or do not want to see some of the difficulties you are facing inside your society, inside your army. But the main media are strongly in favor of Ukraine. Then there are certainly groups who share fake news. Yeah, we do have some websites that share fake news. Some of them are directly organized by the Russian Federation, Sputnik, and so on. I know only the names. I don't have time to go there and to see, but we do have an organization that monitors these fake news, and I've visited several times them, and it's like weather forecast. It's like appeared this, and this is now more spread fake news. Yeah. What else? The Czech society is divided. That's also important to say, not only with respect to the war in Ukraine, but with respect to its internal problems. And now we have a good president, we have a good government, but we know that a huge part of the society is not satisfied with their way of life. That they are feeling to be left behind, they have no job or lower salaries. So there is always the risk that if the situation in Europe gets worse in means of economy, that those people can become the majority and vote their politicians. But so far it goes really well. We changed our government just before the war, and now we are changing our president. And Roman wanted to ask a question?
Yes, it's just I wanted to know what do you think if the modern race of the technology in the world is a result of humans' work on nature as shepherd, steward, or gardener, and if it's a result of their work as good steward, shepherd, or gardener, or as bad shepherd, steward, or gardener. What do you think about it?
Well, I believe that it is not connected, the situation now is not connected to the Bible as it was presented by Ellen White. I believe that the beginnings of the problems are somewhere else, that it's more about our struggle to gain more and to be the winners and to control. This is in the modernity the struggle to control everything around us. Probably so.
Okay. I think we should let Professor rest a little bit after the stressful night and difficult lecture. I think I hope it was the only time in your life when you delivered the lecture in a bomb shelter.
It was the first time.
And I hope last.
I hope as well.
But you will remember it for this, I'm sure. And I want to thank you very much for the lecture, and connecting to the question about the support of Ukraine, I also want to say that Professor Dominik and his colleagues were very encouraging and helpful to us during the war when it started. We were many times in touch over the news in Ukraine. He called me what's going on. Many of us went there. Yuri spent several months there, and some other students and staff members traveled to Olomouc. And also I want to thank you especially for the collection of money that the faculty staff members had to buy 2 generators for Ukraine, which I passed to some charity organization here in Lviv, and they passed the generators along to the east of Ukraine, to the places where they are most needed. And so that's really appreciated, because not all of our partners did as much as you did. Thank you very much.